the pulpit mic. So, okay, I just want you to know that. And then, okay, we start.
Are we live?
Click.
Be careful what you say.
Okay, clicker. Yeah, not here. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Dead again. There's Brenda. Dun, 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 dun.
There you go.
Yes, and you're going to keep up with me with the clicker?
No, John gonna keep up with you. John.
Okay. Oh, yeah. You're going to be the only student. No, Angel's coming in here. I think Brenda's coming in here. And usually Joey and or Callie come in. And, yeah, we got a bunch of sick people. It's the middle of winter, and, yeah. Yeah. But they just don't know what they're missing.
Well, I missed last week, so I wasn't sick, but I couldn't.
Yeah, you had a valid reason. How come? There we go. Okay, now we got. So you need to speak into this when the time comes. I'm going to talk a little bit first with our mystery guest.
You never get through your syllabus. Your syllabus is very ambitious.
Yes. And you know what? If I've had 2 days, and Jackson will tell you that we've pretty much been back to back, just boom, 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 with people and visits and all that. I really wanted to do a questionnaire tonight and some blanks, but I'm going to save that till next week.
You went up to visit someone Tuesday. You said, I'm going.
Yes,
Did you go to Jackson, New Jersey?
we did.
Because when you said Jackson, and then George
Oh.
said, are you taking the high-speed line? I don't think that.
I-
Because we had a discussion later. I said, what he said Jackson. Well, he was with Jackson. I said, I know. But I thought he was going to
Yes,
Jackson.
yes.
And I said, don't the high-speed line doesn't go up there.
Right. I wasn't going to take issue with her. Yes, yes, yes. I know where I'm going, and there's no high-speed line that goes to that Jackson. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So Juju, remind me. Yeah, you did do a little blurb before one of our lessons, right? A little blurb, a little intro on why. You didn't?
She didn't. I was here that day.
Oh boy. Why don't you want to? You are so timid. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, by the way, Jackson, one other thing I have to say, and this is important. Don't tell me I don't have my. Oh, there. That by
Jackson in the house.
by standing on this podium, you are giving your permission to share this with the whole world, because this is being streamed. And so, okay, good. Okay, Steve, we have permission for him to share. He knows. He signed off. He signed all the copyright laws. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So are we live?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're going to start. We don't want you to sing. Yes. I'm going to close this door. Okay. All righty. So, Steve, can we literally start any minute? Okay. Okay. Hey, come on in, you guys. Good to see you. We are we're going to start here in just a moment. We've got a guest presenter tonight that I'm very excited to introduce to you. When I started this class, I had absolutely no idea that we were going to have a presenter with us who has actually lived in Amman, Jordan for 2 months, and who has lived in Athens, Greece for 2 years. So, but he's here in person tonight, and we're going to hear from him. So I do expect a few more to be walking in, but those of us that are here, we're not going to penalize you by making you wait. And we're going to be, hey, Miss Cindy, we're going to be finishing in 45 or 50 minutes at the most. To get all of my slides in without making them look too bad, I kind of rearranged the schedule, but it's the same schedule that I passed out last week, so I'm not going to pass it out again. And this is actually the fifth class in this series. We got interrupted by Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And so, as I've mentioned earlier in this class, we may go actually a little bit past the end of this quarter. And so, if a new class is starting at our church at the end of this quarter, you'll have to decide, okay, am I going to stay the last 2-3 weeks in this archaeology class, or am I going to go ahead and go to the other class? So tonight we're focusing a little bit more on the Dead Sea, and we've mentioned Masada before, kind of from an archaeological point of view, but we're going to be talking about Masada a little bit more, and I'm going to be testing you on what you remember from what we've highlighted before, and then we're going to be talking about if you are in Israel, specifically down in the southern part of Israel, what are you likely to see? What are some of the things that our group is going to see while we're there? But in a lengthy conversation yesterday with our new intern, Jackson Howes, I discovered that he had actually lived in Jordan. And not only had he lived in Jordan, he had studied in Jordan. And he mentioned a fact that I had heard on one of our tours, but quite honestly, I don't even know if I told you this, because, I don't want you to think I don't know everything. But anyway, I had known that many of the Dead Sea Scrolls ended up in Jordan somehow, but I had forgotten that. So I think I may have even said in one of these classes that all of the scrolls are housed in the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. And if I did say that, that is not accurate. And so as Jackson and I were visiting yesterday, I said, hey, I've never lived in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan, so how about we'll just extend our class from last week a little bit more, and you give us some slides. And so these first 5, 6, 7 slides are slides that Jackson sent us. And we've got those into the presentation tonight. So, Jackson, let me just have you come up here, and we're going to do a little bit of a back and forth. And I mean, not just every class gets to have a man who's actually lived there. So, Jackson, who are you? Tell us about yourself.
I'm from Arkansas, and I somehow managed to make it out all the way to Athens, Greece. So that's where I've been living for the last couple of years.
Okay, and I know one of the very famous universities in Arkansas is just right up the road from where you grew up, called Harding University.
Yes, the famed alma mater, Dan Cooper.
Yeah.
Also my alma mater.
I went there before he was even born, or even thought of, probably. And so he did the undergraduate program in Searcy, Arkansas, and then he did the graduate program at the same place where I did in Memphis. At the time it was called Harding University Graduate School of Religion, but they got sophisticated and just changed it to
Harding School of Theology.
Harding School of Theology, right. So he then did, after he finished the undergraduate degree at Harding in Searcy, he went to Memphis and finished the MDiv, which is the big theological degree that all the really, really smart guys do. And so that took 3 years or 4?
4.
4 years. And tell us some of the studies. Did you have a special expertise there, or what was your specific degree? Emphasis.
The emphasis was on Hebrew, Bible, Old Testament, Hebrew language. I was the graduate assistant for the Hebrew professor, and then Greek language also. So I guess biblical studies was the emphasis, biblical languages.
So most of us preachers, we are required to take a couple of semesters of Greek, and at least in the master's degree in divinity, we're required to take some theology, or some Hebrew, but we just kind of get through that and move on. Not him. That was something he spent extra time with, and even was the assistant to the teacher. So my hat is off to you if I had a hat. I'm very impressed. So why are you in New Jersey right now?
Some of you probably know Craig and Katie Young, and I'm here because their daughter, Esther Young, is here. She works as a nurse down at Cooper Hospital, and we met in Athens. She was there on a medical mission trip, and we fell in love, and when I came back to the U.S., I wanted to be in the same place as her, and it just worked out that they could put me to work here at Pittman also.
Right. So just in a marvelous way that God works, and I've been really excited about that. God can even work through a death. He really can. And so when Glenn Durham passed, one of our former ministers, his wife, Debbie, and his 2 adult children said that rather than memorial funds being given for our capital expansion, that they thought it would honor Glenn if we would make donations to hire an intern. We had no idea who that intern was going to be. But now we know who it was, and the request is that be an intern that had a heavy emphasis on evangelism, reaching out in the Northeast or somewhere else. And so what you need to know about him, I've discovered via his resume and via conversation, is he is passionate about sharing the good news, and particularly sharing the good news among kind of a unique segment of society that scares a lot of us. So why don't you tell our group real quickly who that segment is and what your unique qualifications are to reach out to them.
So in Athens, I was working with refugees that were coming out of Syria and Iraq. And as part of that, I started learning Arabic. And then that's actually what took me to Jordan, a little segue here. I went to Jordan and spent a couple months there in Arabic language school.
So wait a minute. Hebrew, Greek, Arabic, and French. And you still speak English too.
Sometimes.
Again, that is impressive. I don't mind saying that is impressive. Okay.
My French is not as good as my Arabic, just for the
Okay,
record.
so he's better in Arabic. That'll impress you even more. So future plans then. After 6 months here, what is your passion, your heart's desire?
My long-term plan is to go back to Europe, where I can work with Middle Eastern people and to reach out to people coming out of the Middle East. So if you know anything about the Middle East, it's pretty much illegal to change your religion there. But in Europe, it's free. So I think Europe is the place where I'll be long-term.
And the church where you were last 2 years,
Yes.
studied with, tell us a little bit about the church and the conversions and that, if you will.
It's a small Greek church that was basically dying out. There's maybe 5 people left, and over the last 5 years, there's been over 100 baptisms, and now if you go to the church today, there's tons of young families and babies, and all kinds of people running around, but they're all from Syria. There's no young Greek people there. So the church is completely changed, but it's been revitalized, and it's really great what's going on there.
Okay, good. Whew, it just makes me excited to hear about it. So, you know how to use these clickers. We have not rehearsed, but I've asked him to talk a little bit more about Jordan and anything he thinks is relevant to say there, but specifically Jordan as it pertains to the Dead Sea Scrolls, because there's some history involved, and believe it or not, Jordan ended up with a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So anyway, there's the clicker if you want to do your slides. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this is back to Jordan.
I've got a few other things in here besides the Dead Sea Scrolls, just to kind of whet your appetite to go to Jordan. So everyone wants to go to Israel for all the biblical history, but there's a ton of stuff in Jordan too, from especially Old Testament history. So this is from the top of a column from the Ammonites. So if you remember, Ammon and Moab came from the two daughters of Lot. So modern day, now this might be kind of small. So modern day Jordan is there, and then the top is Ammon, and then Moab and Edom. So when you're reading the Bible and you see Ammon, Moab, and Edom, those are all in modern day Jordan. And so this is from a column from the Ammonites. And just so that you know kind of the time period, the Ammonites were around from the 10th century BC to 332 BC when Alexander the Great came to town. So this is the earliest Ammonite stone carving that's ever been found. And it's free to see in Amman, Jordan. So go there.
And just so some of our people aren't real knowledgeable of the Old Testament, so and maybe you said this when I was taking care of the lights. Ammonites were arch enemies of David and the Israelites.
Yeah. So it kind of makes you think about how things don't really change that much. That Ammon, Moab, and Edom, the enemies of Israel, are right there around them, and there's still a lot of animosity in that region. Okay, this one is really super interesting to me. This is a Moabite inscription. It's the earliest example of Aramaic literature that's ever been discovered. So the language that Jesus spoke, this is the earliest inscription that's ever been discovered from about 800 years before Jesus lived. And this inscription is about Balaam, the prophet Balaam that's in Numbers 22. He was attested in other sources of the time, and so this is completely not related to the Bible in any way, but this is about Balaam, a Moabite prophet. And it's our earliest example of Aramaic literature. And you can see it's kind of fragmented and broken, and it can't be completely translated because of that, but it's really cool that we have a record of somebody mentioned in the Bible that's completely unrelated to the Bible.
So just a question, would that have been on papyrus or some kind of vellum?
No, it was plaster. So it was plaster on a wall, and an earthquake is actually what broke it apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where was that discovered?
This was in a city in Jordan, kind of outside of Amman. But then now, I was telling Dan, the Jordan Museum in Amman is a great museum to go to. It's also where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. So you can see all this stuff there. I think all these pictures are from the Jordan Museum. So if you're going on the trip, make sure you tell Dan to take you there. These are coins from the Decapolis. So this is New Testament history. If you read about the Decapolis in the Gospels, the southern few cities of the Decapolis were in modern-day Jordan. The rest of them were in Syria. So there's a little bit of history of the New Testament also there in the museum in Jordan. This one I just threw in for fun. This is on the citadel, so the highest point in the city of Amman. There's a cave that was used for burials. So this is from the Bronze Age, so about 900 years before Jesus or more, maybe about 1,000 years before Jesus. This is what a burial cave looked like in the Middle East. So this may give you some idea as to what burial caves would have looked like even when Jesus was buried. All right, now this is really small. This is just a map of the Decapolis, the cities. I thought it was really interesting that in a Muslim country like Jordan, Jordan's 97% Muslim, that there was all this history, biblical history in their national museum. So it's really cool how much they devote to their history, even if it's not their religious heritage. This is a stone stela from a Moabite king, Misha. And this is noteworthy for two reasons, actually three reasons. The first one is the French stole it from Jordan, and it's in the Louvre now. And that's still a source of great animosity. The Jordanians want it back. So this is a reproduction that's in Amman. And it's noteworthy for two reasons from biblical history. First of all, it mentions the house of Omri. So if you remember King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, Ahab's father was Omri. And so this is a mention of Israelite kings in a non-biblical source. But more noteworthy, it is the first instance of the use of the name Yahweh outside of the Bible. So in this inscription, they used the name Yahweh to talk about the God of Israel. And that's the first time that is attested outside of the Bible. So it's a really important monument for biblical historians. And then, of course, Moab, also another enemy of Israel. And then this, also on the citadel, is a gate. It's been reconstructed, but this is from the Ammonite era. So this is about 3,000 years old, and it's been completely recovered and reconstructed there on the citadel. And the citadel is cool because you go there, and it starts with the Ammonites, so about 1,000 years before Christ, and then it goes to the Roman period, which is contemporaneous with Christ, and then it goes all the way through the Umayyad Muslim Caliphate, which is in the 700s after Christ. So in one tiny place in Amman, you get almost 2,000 years of history, and you have artifacts from all 2,000 years right there next to each other. It's really amazing. And I don't have a picture of this, but in the Archaeological Museum on the Citadel also are the earliest human figures that were ever sculpted. So these sculptures that are about from 8,000 or 9,000 BC, discovered in Jordan. So the history of Jordan goes way back. I'll throw in a fun fact here. Trivia question. Dan can't answer. Does anyone know what the Greek name of Amman is? So I said earlier that Alexander the Great came in and took over. Does anyone know what he named the city? No, close. Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
So maybe there's some Eagles fans in Amman. I don't know. But the thing that I saw in Amman that was the coolest thing to me were the Dead Sea Scrolls. And unfortunately, you can't take any pictures. They would probably throw you in prison if you took pictures of them. So this is a picture of one of the caves, actually at the Dead Sea. But there are 4 scrolls that I saw in Amman. The first one is it's called Petra Isaiah. It's basically a commentary on the Isaiah scroll. And Isaiah was one of the most important documents that they had to the community there. And we know from their manuscript of Isaiah how accurate our Hebrew Bible is. It's the Dead Sea Scroll is a testament to the accuracy of our Bible, and especially the Isaiah scroll that they have. But in Amman, they have a commentary on their Isaiah scroll, which is really interesting to me. And then they had a scroll of Ecclesiastes, just a fragment of like chapter 8 of Ecclesiastes, I think. And then they had a scroll called the Testimonia scroll, which was a scroll that was written about their messianic expectations. So this Jewish community, the first century, what they expected of the Messiah, which is really interesting for us as Christians because our Messiah came in the first century. So it's just interesting to see what their expectations were. And then a cool one, if you like Indiana Jones, all that stuff, you guys are going to Petra. But there's something called a copper scroll. And it's the only scroll that's been discovered that was made from copper. And what the scroll is a treasure map. And it's supposedly where this community hid their treasures, and then they made a map on this copper scroll that would be preserved. It wouldn't decay like the papyrus. So no one's ever been able to decipher it and find the treasure, But maybe if you go to Jordan, you can figure it out and find the treasure. So, yeah, now Angel wants to go. Yeah, so that's just some things. Most people, when they think about biblical history, they don't think of Amman, Jordan. But if you go there, there's tons to see. These are just some examples that I wanted to share with you guys tonight.
Say a little bit about the geopolitical history of how Jordan has all of those things from the Dead Sea, or all those scrolls. You're familiar with that, right?
Yes. Okay, so maybe you can see it a little bit on this map. When, after World War II, the British mandate of Palestine, all that stuff, the Transjordan region was what became Jordan. But when they were sorting all that out, there was a little piece west of the Jordan River that included Jericho that was part of Jordan initially.
I'm going to point right here with this pointer. Yeah. And right down in here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Maybe even below that.
Maybe up.
Okay, here's the...
Yeah, so Jericho, I think it's just a little bit northwest of the Dead Sea.
Right, okay, right in here. Because this is, the Sea of Galilee here, and then, okay, right in there. So that was actually kind of Jordan's territory originally.
Yes, yeah, so that was part of Jordan originally in the late 40s. And while they had control of it, they snatched a few things from Jericho. So if you go to the Archaeological Museum, you can see bricks from Jericho from like 6,000 BC, which is really interesting, and all kinds of Jericho stuff. But that's also when they got the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right.
So the Jordanians, they complained about the French taking their monuments, but they took a few things from west of the Jordan River also. So I guess it goes both ways.
Yeah, those archaeologists are not real nice people sometimes. There's a lot of academic pride. There's a lot of pride in, so. Okay, any other questions? That's just fascinating to me, and since we were just there last week, I wanted to finish up a little bit more on that. So, okay.
Everyone go to Jordan. That's great.
And interestingly, because of the politics, although he's traveled widely, Jackson has, he's never been to Israel. Because once you go to Israel, there is a strong possibility that can limit your ability to travel in other parts of the Middle East if the Israelis found out that you've been there. So anyway, we're going to go on back. Thank you, Jackson. Excellent. Yeah, I loved it. Now we're going to go down and talk about Masada a little bit more. And we introduced Masada when we were first doing the little segment in an earlier class on the archaeology. But here's a slide that I don't think I showed before, and I like this slide because it very clearly shows the three levels: the lower level, the mid-level right in here, and then this is the top level. So those of you who were here during our earlier presentation, tell us what you remember we said about Masada. First of all, I'll ask you specific questions. How did we learn most of what we know about Masada? There was a historian. Who remembers what his name was? That was Josephus, who wrote about it. And Josephus was a Jew who basically went to work for Rome and was not highly thought of by the Jews because of that. But he was a historian, and so we owe a lot of what we know to the first century world to Josephus, because he wrote down a lot of things on behalf of the Roman government. And so he was the one that told us, let me go ahead and ask you a couple more questions to see what you remember, either from this class or from other times you've studied. When was Jerusalem destroyed? The temple? 70 A.D. By General Titus. I am so impressed. Yeah. And knowing that the fall was imminent, a stronghold of just under 1,000 Jews kind of made their way by night to Masada. And what few troops were there It was originally Herod's kind of getaway, like people in Jersey have a place at the shore. Well, this was Herod's place at the shore, except there was no shore there. This was his getaway when going got tough up in Jerusalem, and he wanted to get away from all the craziness in Jerusalem. He'd go down to Masada. So during a time when they were expecting any trouble, obviously there would be Roman soldiers that were there, but the little renegade Jewish band surprised the Roman soldiers that were there, and they took Masada when Jerusalem was under siege. And then once Jerusalem fell, the Roman army decided our next place to attack is Masada. We're going to get those hard-headed, non-cooperative, rebellious Jews. And so Titus took 10,000 soldiers, 10,000 Roman soldiers, according to Josephus, down to Masada. He first of all destroyed Rome, and we have only he destroyed Jerusalem, and we have only one section of Jerusalem left from 70 AD that is intact, and we call that section what? The Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. One of those terms can be used interchangeably. And but since the Jews who had then inhabited Masada, by the way, they basically encamped in this top area right here. That's where their 960 Jews camped out. And Titus had his 10,000 soldiers strategically all around the base. In fact, when we will be up here on our next trip, and when you're up here, you can look down and see all around the base of the plateau where Roman camps were. You'll be able to see that. And you'll see outlines of where they were. And so it took them 3 years under siege before they were finally able to capture Masada. Here's a reproduction of what it probably looked like. Here's the 3 levels that are much clearer. And the top level, this is one of the ladies that was with us on our last tour. And this is how they finally got to the top of Masada. So the Romans would have started back in here. Here's the plateau going up, and they used slave labor to build this ramp up to the top of Masada. And you say, well, why didn't the Jews up at the top go ahead and just kill the slaves, whatever armament they had? Why didn't they kill them? And we talked about why they didn't do that. Why didn't they? They were Jewish slaves that the Romans had taken from Jerusalem. And so the Jews up on the top, up here, were not willing to kill their countrymen to prevent them from building the ramp, although they knew the inevitable. They knew what was eventually going to happen, and it happened indeed. But the Romans were so feared that the day that the siege was coming, the 960 or so committed suicide the night before the Romans sieged the city. And there were some people that were, and this is all according to Josephus, who was not a Bible writer. He didn't write anything in the Bible. He was just a historian. Several asked after class, last time we talked about this, well, how did they do it? And 10 men were selected to kill the other 950. And then of the 10 men, 1 man was selected to kill the other 9 men, and then the last man was to have killed himself. And we know a bit about that because there was a woman and a handful of children that hid and escaped, and they were found by the Romans then. So anyway, it's just a fascinating story, fascinating, at least it is to me, and I hope it is to you as well. So we're not going to climb the top of it when we go. We have a cable car. And here's an example. So we're going to start down here. Our charter bus parks down in here, and then we jump on a cable car, and we ride all the way to the top. The time of the year that we're going in April, if you were very, very hardy, you could use the ramp, and you could walk up. But it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and we don't have time to do that. Although several in our group last time we were there did choose to walk down the ramp. And so I don't even know if that'll be an option this time. But this car will probably hold, I'm guessing, 40 or 50 people, and we'll just take a car up to the top of the ramp, okay? So, right next to Masada, we're done with that right now, it's kind of right in the midst of, or on the outer edge of, the Judean wilderness. Remember, after Jesus was baptized at Bethany beyond the Jordan, your Bible says that he went into the wilderness to be tempted. And so the wilderness, I don't know what you think of when you think of wilderness, but you might think of a sandy desert area. It's not. The wilderness is more like this area up here, just barren hills that go on for miles and miles and miles, and there is a little oasis every once in a while, and if you want to take a camel ride, usually there's a kid who you pay him your $2 or your $5, and he'll let you get up on his camel, and usually there's a refreshment stand. This stand right here, when we were here, was they would squeeze fresh pomegranates for you, and so you could have fresh pomegranates. But this is, again, down at the southern part of Israel. And also right in that immediate area is the city of Jericho. And Jackson mentioned the Jordanians got some of the ruins from the ancient city of Jericho, some of the bricks. One of the interesting things, again, every time I visited Israel, is how one site can have significance, great significance for Old Testament stories, and that same site can have significance from New Testament stories. And so if you wanted to read the battle of Joshua fighting the battle of Jericho, you'd read it in Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 through chapter 6, 26. We don't have time to read that. We're not going to read that right now. But it's a fascinating story. After the people of Israel had wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, after Moses had been buried at the top of Mount Nebo, which we looked at last time, then Joshua took over the leadership of the people of Israel, the Israelites. And they crossed over the Jordan River. And what was the first city that God instructed them to take? This city right here, Jericho. That was the first city. And there was this one particular woman that helped them get into the city and helped them be successful in their overthrow. What was her name? Rahab. And somehow the people of Jericho got on to the fact that Rahab might have housed some of the spies, and so there was a lot of drama that went on there. And if you haven't read that story, you need to read the early parts of Joshua chapter 5 and 6. And because of her goodness to the people of God, because of her faithfulness, even though all the rest of the city was destroyed, Rahab and her family were spared. And it gets even neater. Rahab, a non-Jew, is in the lineage of Jesus. So Rahab would have been the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. I don't know if you knew that, but that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. And among other things, what that says to me is God has always cared about the outsiders. He's cared about women. He's cared about the underdogs. He's cared about people who may not seem to fit. Well, because of her faith, she did help the people of God. She helped God, and she was victorious, or they were victorious. And so this was a very powerful city. Had walls all around it. And they thought for sure, oh boy, we're never going to take this city. We're not experienced. We don't have any walls. We're going to have to, in fact, breach the walls. And you all remember the story. You could sing the song, Cindy, of how that. They marched around the walls for 6 days, one time a day. And on the seventh day, they marched around the walls 7 times and shouted and blew their trumpets and the ram's horns, and the walls came tumbling down. Okay, So God's people, hip hip hooray, they conquer the city of Jericho. This is not in any slide, but the next city they went to was the city, who remembers the second city that they were going to take? A little podunk, little village like Pittman. I mean, it was a nothing city compared to Jericho. What was the name of that city? Ai. And how did they do against Ai? They got beat bad. Why did they get beat bad, Jay? Do you remember? Yes. God said to the people of Israel, I am going to give you Jericho. It's going to be yours. Not one loss. But in return, you don't take any of the loot. You don't take any of the spoils of taking that city, because that is all going to be a sacrifice to me. This is a fascinating story. Well, guess what? There was one guy who thought nobody's going to notice. Nobody will notice if I take it. Well, he took it, and as a punishment for his disobedience, God then, the next little easy village that they went to take, God defeated Israel. And you remember as God approached Joshua, why God told Joshua that they had lost that battle? It's a phrase you've probably used before. I can't set you up with, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. There is sin in the camp, right? So God says to Joshua, you cannot take Ai because there is sin in the camp. And how many of us, we've used that phrase probably, how come we didn't succeed here? Well, it's because there's sin in the camp. Somebody in the camp isn't doing right, and so the whole village suffers. It's kind of like, Barbara, where you were teaching a bunch of, I don't know that you ever did this, a bunch of kids, and somebody did something wrong, you didn't know who did it, so you'd punish the whole class. Well, that's what happened. Maybe you wouldn't have done that, but some teachers did, yeah. Okay, so that's the Old Testament story, the city of the Battle of Jericho. And then the New Testament story, one of the best known is the story of Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and the wee little man was he. That story is told in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. And I've said this before, so excuse me if you've heard me say it, but it's a true story. Our first trip to Israel, our guide took us to this sycamore tree right here when we visited Jericho, and our guide says, this is the sycamore tree that Zacchaeus climbed up. The sycamore trees live a long, long time, and they have tested this tree, and this is the tree that Zacchaeus climbed up. Well, it is the only sycamore tree there now, but it's not the tree, okay? Guides later stated the truth, which was, this is a sycamore fig tree, and it's the only one alive in Jericho right now, but it wasn't that tree. So, two very significant stories. This is, again, the southern part of Israel, very near the Dead Sea, and archaeologists tell us that the city of Jericho is the longest continually inhabited city in the world. It's not the oldest city, but it's the longest continually inhabited city in the world, just for whatever it's worth. So that's the story of Jericho. Now, also there in southern Israel is this place called En-Gedi. And I don't know how your Bible spells En-Gedi. I've seen it both ways, depending on what translation you use, E-I-N or just E-N. And En-Gedi, in the midst of this wilderness, I mean, it's a desolate place. There's nothing around. You don't even see Bedouins out on the hills with their sheep, or goats trying to graze. But there is one little oasis. Many people have been there. We have never been there, Catherine and I, but this is something that we're very much looking forward to doing on our next trip. I asked our guide specifically, or our tour company, look, I've never been to En-Gedi. Can we plan to stop at En-Gedi? And the answer is yes, we are. So those who like to walk, those who like to exercise, Barbara will get our 10,000 steps in that day. There are 3 walks that you can do. Or actually, you can stay on the bus if you want to. The air-conditioned bus will be on the whole time of our trip. But there is a short walk to En-Gedi. There is a medium-sized walk up into En-Gedi where the oasis is, and there is a long walk. But this is a sample of what it looks like. I have not been there, so these are not my pictures, but these are pictures that I got off the web. En-Gedi is an oasis. There's just spring waters that jump up, pop up. And what I wanted us to know is, or to notice, is if you read the story of Saul and David, when Saul is still serving as king, but David has been anointed as king, David is still this shepherd boy. He has killed Goliath already, and so Saul is threatened by David. He's not officially the king over Israel. Saul is threatened by David, and so he's out to get David. He's out to kill David. Well, David was not about to kill God's appointed, and so they had spies and found out about where David was hiding out, where Saul was hiding out, and guess where it was? En-Gedi. Open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 22, 1 Samuel chapter 23, and 1 Samuel chapter 24. And in this area, there are all kinds of caves. And so Saul and his soldiers were hiding out in caves. David and his soldiers were hiding out in caves. This is all 1 Samuel. I'm not making this up. It sounds like a World War II exciting story. This is all real from 1000 BC. At night, King David very slyly sneaks over to where Saul is, cuts off a piece of his robe, because he wasn't going to kill God's anointed. And the next day he hollers to Saul, saying, hey, I could have killed you, but I didn't. Well, that makes Saul even madder, because his pride is really hurt now. And as evidence that he could have killed him, but he didn't, is he holds up, he shows him his piece of, the piece of his robe that he has there. So, okay, we're good. Hey, we're going to get done on time unless somebody has some questions. So that's En-Gedi. And let me see what else I have. Yeah, okay, that's En-Gedi, which is still in southern Israel. And also in Jerusalem, I mentioned the story of Zacchaeus, but also in the story in Jericho, in another setting, is the story of the blind man that Jesus heals. That story also takes place there in southern Israel. And maybe I should have stuck a map in here towards the end of this slide, but I did so many maps the first 2 weeks of our class. I hope those are still in your mind. So remember that we've landed up in Jordan when we first land. Then we're making our way down to the southern part of Jordan. When we're down south, we cross from Jordan, across the Jordan River, across the Red Sea, coming into the southern part of Israel. And now we're starting to work our way from the southern part of Israel up farther north, or actually next 2 weeks we're going to be talking about Jerusalem. And some of us, probably everybody that's ever gone on a trip to the Holy Land probably spent time in Jerusalem. In fact, some of the short trips that you'll do, I've even seen 8-day trips. Well, an 8-day trip to the Holy Land, you spend 1 day getting there, 1 day getting back. And so you've got maybe 5 or 6 days time you're there, and they'll spend at least 2 days in Jerusalem. So who's going to tell us what is this right here? This, and where is it? Some of you that have been there before. Anybody remember? Dome of the Rock. And from the first 2 classes, we talked about Jerusalem being a holy spot for what 3 major religions? Judaism, Christianity, and the Muslim faith. And so this is right now a Muslim mosque. And interesting how history changes. When we first went to Israel in 1976, when my parents were there, you had to take your shoes off, but anybody could walk into this mosque. And so I've been inside of there. But today, because of the tension between the Israelis and the Muslims, no non-Muslim is allowed to walk into the dome, which is on the traditional site where Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice. Again, there's a lot to put together here, but that's the Dome of the Rock. Yeah, okay? You all with me there? This is a picture here. Jay, you've been here with us. What is that? Do you recognize that? Or Jerry, Juju? As soon as I say it, you'll recognize it. It's not a real good picture, but it was the best one I could. This is a picture in Jerusalem from the Garden of Gethsemane. So the Garden of Gethsemane today, these would be olive trees up in here. Here's just some paths that I'm sure weren't laid out that neatly in the day of Jesus, but this is just right across the Kidron Valley from the city of Jerusalem, and we're going to be talking about that some more next week. And then I mentioned earlier the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall. That's one of the sites that we will also visit, and that was the one part that General Titus, the one part of Jerusalem, did not destroy when he destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And by the way, when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD, Judaism changed forever. Judaism has not been the same since then. They were still offering animal sacrifices at the temple. Yes, Jesus had been buried, he'd been crucified, he'd been buried, he'd been resurrected, but Judaism kept on working just as Judaism always had, and so the high priest, they would do the temple sacrifices. But after 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, that stopped permanently Jewish worship the way it had been done, with animal sacrifices and all that. And it was a permanent, forever change. And so Judaism is still practiced, at least three major groups of Jews, the Orthodox, the Conservative, and the Reformed, but Judaism has not had animal sacrifices since 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed. Kind of interestingly, I think that was God's way, personal speculation, of saying, no, Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. He went to the cross. No animal sacrifice will compare. So Jesus killed 30 AD, 33 AD, and the sacrificing continues under Judaism, but finally God says, no, that's enough. Enough animal sacrifice. Jesus was the perfect Lamb of God.
So how do they believe that their sins?
They still practice the Day of Atonement, and that is a time that their sins are acknowledged, and they still believe that the Messiah will come, the most Orthodox, and that when Messiah does come, he will make the ultimate sacrifice then. But obviously they totally reject Jesus as the Messiah in 33 AD. So, well, look, this is it. Thank you for being here. And Jackson, thank you again. What a blessing to have you with us, and all of us learned things that we didn't know before. So anyway, let's consider ourselves dismissed, and go get your kids if you got any. Yeah. Looking around, maybe none of us here have any kids. Yeah. Yeah. So next week, Jerusalem. Next 2 weeks, Jerusalem.